It is no secret that this year the Junior Eurovision Song Contest turns 20. Now, whether or not you've been a fan right since day one or you've only joined a few years ago, you may not know the full story about the Junior Eurovision. How did the first show back in 2003 come to life? Let's find out right here today at the Neon Pavilion. What's up everyone, welcome back to the Neon Pavilion. My name is Niklas and today we're digging deep into the Junior Eurovision history. That's right, today we are going to be talking about the very first Junior Eurovision, but more specifically we're going to be talking about the history of the Junior Eurovision. So I'm gonna take you all the way back to the beginning and we're gonna find out how did this show begin, because it is no secret, like I said in the intro, that this year it is the 20th edition of the show. There's no doubt that the show has evolved massively since the first edition all the way back in Copenhagen in 2003. And compared to the Eurovision Song Contest, a contest with a long rich history dating all the way back to the 1950s, Junior Eurovision is still fairly new and a lot of this information is documented. But I still thought it would be fun to just go all the way back and figure out where did this all actually begin, because maybe some of you are just getting into the Junior Eurovision. Maybe you've been a Eurovision fan for many years and you want to get into this contest now, or maybe you are starting off as a Junior Eurovision fan, moving into the Eurovision world. Whatever may be the case, I thought it would be interesting to just talk a little bit about what is actually the history, how did this all begin? So that's what we're doing today. And in fact, our story starts all the way back in the beginning of the new millennium at DR in Denmark. A few months prior, the Olsen brothers had taken the Danish public by storm and won the Dansk Melodi Grand Prix in Cirkusbygningen in Copenhagen. But at this point, the brothers weren't given great odds for a good finish at the Eurovision in Malmö later that year, but of course, we'll get back to that. The point is that DR had held a Melodi Grand Prix outside of their own studios for the first time since 1993. And in general, it just seemed that DR wanted to make Eurovision cool again in the country. And what better way to do that than to turn to the younger generation?
God eftermiddag og rigtig hjertelig velkommen til Børneidrættens Melodi Grand Prix år 2000. Er I klar derude?
On the 13th of April 2000, DR held the first Børneidrættens Melodi Grand Prix. Now, if we were to translate that name into English, it would be the Children's Channel 1 Song Contest. Children's Channel 1, that was the main kids programming on DR1 at the time, so it made perfect sense to bring a junior version of the Dansk Melodi Grand Prix to the screens on that block, and they did. 5 songs took part this year, and the winners, that was girl group Femininum with a song about how it always feels like your teachers are speaking complete nonsense. Whether or not you're still in school, I'm sure we can all relate to that. Now, while this story may seem slightly unrelated, this is actually the first time that we're seeing a junior version of like a Melodi Grand Prix Eurovision format. And just a year later, we get a program that's way closer to what we have today. In 2001, the interest in Eurovision had grown to new heights in Denmark, of course following the surprise win of Fly on the Wings of Love at Eurovision the year prior. And just a month before the big show in Sold Out Parken Arena in Copenhagen, the DR studios held the DMGP for Kids, now simply called MGP. So it was no longer part of the Children's Channel 1 broadcast, but instead it was a Saturday night event just like Eurovision and just like Dansk Melodi Grand Prix. Kids aged between 8 to 15 had been able to send in their songs, and at the final, 10 songs participated, with 15-year-old Sisse winning with her dance pop banger Du har brug for mig. I think it's fair to say that MGP was actually an instant hit in Denmark, with close to 1 million viewers on the first show. And in 2002, DR could proudly announce that over 2,000 kids had sent in their songs to them in hopes of taking home the trophy as the winner of MGP 2002. However, the trophy wasn't the only prize this year, as the top 3 at the final would all be taking part in MGP Nordic later that year. You see, the interest in MGP certainly hadn't gone unnoticed in the rest of Scandinavia. Both Sweden and Norway could see the potential in launching their own junior editions of their national finals for Eurovision, and during 2002, the Norwegian MGP Junior and the Swedish Lilla Melodifestivalen were born. With Sweden and Norway joining the fun, it was decided to create the MGP Nordic, a sorta Nordic Eurovision for kids, with the top 3 from each country battling it out in a big show from Forum in Copenhagen. 3 presenters, 1 from each country, welcomed the viewers from all over Scandinavia to the MGP Nordic in 2002. And in true Eurovision fashion, you could not vote for your own country. Danish singer Ras had won the MGP just a month prior, and now at MGP Nordic, he scored the most 12 points, making him the first ever Nordic MGP winner. MGP Nordic turned out to be a great success for the 3 Scandinavian countries, but it wasn't only in the Nordics that people were watching the show. In fact, I think in a certain office somewhere in Switzerland, TV executives were tuning into this MGP Nordic, and they might have actually liked what they seen. Now, before we move any further in this MGP adventure, I do think it's important to mention at this point that DR and the other Scandinavian broadcasters, they weren't the only ones experimenting with a kids song contest here back at the start of the 2000s. In fact, at the same time that DR had launched MGP back in 2001, TVP, the Polish broadcaster, had also been working on a kids song contest. In fact, they were working on somewhat of an international song contest with the name Euroconcurs. Euroconcurs, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, was held for the first time in 2001 as part of the International Children's Song and Dance Festival in the town of Konin in Poland. The festival is actually the oldest children event in Europe, dating all the way back to 1979. Originally, the festival actually only consisted of dance competitions, but singing was later added to the event. Back in 2001, TVP together with the EBU used the festival to launch the Euroconcurs, a sort of experimental contest to create a televised singing competition for children from countries under the EBU umbrella. And interestingly, while we're on the subject of this Euroconcurs, the Polish Wikipedia page actually claimed that Poland was considered as the first host country for the Junior Eurovision, given their work with this Euroconcurs contest, but I haven't been able to find any sources that confirm that, so take it with a grain of salt. I do, however, think it's extremely important at this point that we do acknowledge the efforts that TVP put in when it comes to this contest. While the competition may have some elements that are further away from the Eurovision formula, it definitely helped to test out the possibility of something like the Junior Eurovision. The contest actually also continued a number of years after Poland withdrew originally from the Junior Eurovision. But since information on the contest is mostly, or well, only really in Polish, this is all I can really talk about when it comes to the show. But it's not often that this show gets mentioned when we talk about the origins of the Junior Eurovision, so I felt like it was in place to actually mention this because I feel like this is something that's only really been discovered by Junior Eurovision fans in recent years, and maybe some of you didn't even know that existed. There are clips of it on YouTube, you can go check it out if you want, but it's in Polish, so... Anyways, let's get back to 2002 and the original story. So MGP Nordic definitely seemed to be another success for DR and of course for the other Scandinavian broadcasters. But the founding father of the MGP, head of children's entertainment at DR, Preben Vridstoft, he saw a bigger potential in this contest. So he went to the EBU headquarters to present the idea of a Eurovision Song Contest for kids. And luckily for him and for us, I suppose, it didn't take long for the EBU to agree on the idea. And at the end of November 2002, EBU officially announced that they were working on what was at the time called the Eurovision Song Contest for children. That show was set to take place the year after in 2003, of course. DR was announced as the host of the contest, with Forum in Copenhagen as the venue, the same place actually that had hosted MGP Nordic the year prior. If you look at the first press release about this show, it was announced that a draw had been held to find the participating countries, since the interest from broadcasters had been big. Originally, 15 countries were announced as taking part in the first ever Junior Eurovision. However, Germany and Slovakia withdrew before the competition, while Belarus, Cyprus, and Poland later joined the lineup, landing on the 16 countries. The original rules of the Junior Eurovision, they definitely followed that of the original Danish MGP closely. All children taking part had to be between 8 and 15 years old on the day of their national competition. The song must be performed in their national language, and they must have composed their own music and lyrics without any help from professionals or help from adults in general. This isn't really the case for the Junior Eurovision anymore, but it was for a number of years. And so the Eurovision Song Contest for children was a reality. Of course, eventually the show was renamed to Junior Eurovision as we know it today, and on the 15th of November 2003, television presenter Camilla Ottesen, who started her journey on Children's Channel 1 and had previously hosted every MGP up to this point, together with Danish rapper Remy, welcome viewers from all over the contest to
the first Junior Eurovision Song Contest ever!
Of course, the first ever event was an exciting celebration of European music for children, a brand new entry into the Eurovision family of event, with Croatia not only winning the first ever Junior Eurovision, but also being the only song so far to ever win a Eurovision contest from position number 2. But I'm sure you all know all of this by now. Of course, this was just the beginning. The Junior Eurovision is a massive hit today, and it has gone through many changes since the first contest back in 2003. And this video was mainly going to be focused on the history and the beginnings of the Junior Eurovision, but I would love to also talk about some of the changes and some of the events and some of the experiences. Some of the things that the Junior Eurovision has given us in the past years. So join me next time right here at the Neon Pavilion, where we're going to be talking about some of the exciting changes and some of the fantastic moments that the Junior Eurovision has given us in the 19 previous editions. This is of course all leading up to the Junior Eurovision this year in Yerevan on the 11th of December. I'm a huge fan of the Junior Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, I remember being there right from the beginning. I watched the first MGP in 2001. I watched MGP Nordic and absolutely loved it. I remember being sick at home. Unfortunately, the week up to the Junior Eurovision, I was in bed, I was feeling sick, but when that evening came and we had the very first Junior Eurovision, I was up from my bed, I was excited, I was dancing, I was having fun, and this is an event that's always just meant a lot to me. I feel like, you know, the Junior Eurovision really captures the childish heart inside of me, and I've loved following the contest, and I've also loved following the evolution of this contest ever since its humble beginnings in 2003. So I'm definitely very excited, not only for the show this year, of course, but also for the next video, which is probably gonna come out next week or the week after, I hope, leading up to the Junior Eurovision, where we're going to be talking about some of the exciting moments we've had over the years, because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about there, both in terms of like rule changes, but also some of the things that we've experienced in Junior Eurovision, and some things we've experienced here that we haven't experienced at the grown-ups Eurovision. So that's all pretty exciting, but that's all for the next video. Did you know about the history of the Junior Eurovision? Did you learn anything new today? Leave it all down in the comments below if you want. And thanks so much for watching this little retrospective on the beginning of the Junior Eurovisions. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the Neon Pavilion if you haven't already. And then I'll hopefully see you guys very soon.